What happens when technology meant to protect us becomes the weapon used against us? And what if the very system designed to keep people out accidentally exposed the truth everyone was trying to hide? This is the story of 68-year-old Professor Eleanor Baptiste, a woman who spent 40 years teaching civil rights history at Georgetown University, a grandmother of 5, a woman who had flown internationally over 200 times, and on one October morning, she was blocked from boarding her flight home because, according to airport security, her face didn't match the system. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. The facial recognition system didn't fail because of her. It failed because of everyone. And when it crashed spectacularly in front of 300 witnesses, it revealed something the airport had been desperately trying to hide for months. Imagine standing at a gate being told by a machine that you're not who you say you are. Your passport is real, your ticket is valid, your fingerprints match, but an algorithm has decided you're a security threat. And when you ask why, they can't tell you. They just know the computer said no. For 43 minutes, Professor Baptiste stood at that gate while security guards, supervisors, and technicians tried to figure out why the system kept rejecting her. Some passengers sympathized, others complained about the delay, and a few quietly recorded what was unfolding. Then, at exactly 9:17 a.m., the entire facial recognition network crashed. Not just at one gate, not just at one terminal, at every checkpoint in the airport. And when technicians finally pulled the error logs, what they found made national headlines. The system wasn't broken, it was biased. And Professor Baptiste wasn't the first victim. She was just the first one who refused to walk away quietly. So how does a cutting-edge security system become a tool for discrimination? What did those error logs reveal? And how did one elderly professor's patience expose a scandal that reached the highest levels of airport security? This story will change how you think about technology, security, and who really gets to decide if you belong. October 12, 2024, Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, Terminal B, 8:34 a.m. Professor Eleanor Baptiste had been visiting her daughter in Boston for a week. Now she was heading home to Washington, D.C., a short one-hour flight she'd taken dozens of times. She'd checked in online the night before, packed her single carry-on, and arrived at the airport with plenty of time. Security screening went smoothly. Her TSA pre-check got her through in minutes. She grabbed a tea, checked her email, and made her way to Gate 35 for her 9:30 a.m. departure. At 8:30 a.m., boarding began. Eleanor joined the line with her group, phone in hand with her digital boarding pass ready. But this airport had recently implemented something new: facial recognition gates. Instead of just scanning your boarding pass, you now had to stand in front of a camera that would verify your identity against your passport photo and government databases. The technology was supposed to be faster, more secure, more efficient. Eleanor approached the gate. The agent, a young woman named Ashley Chen, smiled professionally. "Good morning. Please look at the camera." Eleanor looked up at the small camera mounted above the scanner. A loading circle appeared on the screen, then a red X. Identity verification failed. Ashley frowned. "That's odd. Can you try again?" Eleanor repositioned herself, looked directly at the camera. The same result, red X. Let me try manually scanning your boarding pass." Ashley scanned Eleanor's phone. The boarding pass was valid. She then asked for Eleanor's passport. Everything matched. Same name, same date of birth, same passport number that Eleanor had used to check in online. But when Ashley tried the facial recognition again, the system rejected her. Again. "I'm going to need to call my supervisor," Ashley said apologetically. The supervisor, Brian Kowalski, arrived within 2 minutes. By now, Eleanor had been standing at the gate for 8 minutes while other passengers flowed past her into the jetway. Brian tried the facial recognition himself. Red X. He manually entered Eleanor's passport information. The system showed her as a legitimate passenger with a valid ticket, but the facial recognition refused to clear her. "Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience. The system is having trouble verifying your face. We're going to need to do additional screening." Eleanor, who had spent 4 decades teaching about systemic discrimination, felt a familiar chill. Additional screening for what? My passport is valid, my ticket is valid. What exactly is the problem? The facial recognition system is flagging you as a potential security risk. Based on what? Brian couldn't answer that, because the system didn't provide explanations. It just gave red X's or green checks. 2 TSA agents arrived. They asked Eleanor to step aside to a separate area. They checked her ID again. They asked her questions about her travel. Where was she coming from? What was the purpose of her trip? Where did she live? Eleanor answered every question calmly, but inside she was furious. She'd written a book about algorithmic bias. She'd testified before Congress about discrimination in automated systems, and now she was living it. One of the TSA agents tried the facial recognition again using a different terminal. Red X. Another agent tried from a different angle. Red X. They tried having her remove her glasses. Red X. They tried having her put her glasses back on. Red X. It was now 9:03 a.m. Eleanor had been detained for 29 minutes. Her flight was boarding its final passengers, and still nobody could explain why the system kept rejecting a 68-year-old retired professor with a spotless travel record. "This is ridiculous," Eleanor said, her voice steady but firm. "I want to—" The crash was spectacular. Not just at Gate 35, not just in Terminal B. Every facial recognition system in the entire airport went offline simultaneously. Passengers who'd been sailing through security suddenly found themselves stuck. Gates ground to a halt. TSA checkpoints backed up with hundreds of confused travelers. The overhead announcement crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a temporary technical issue with our identity verification systems. Please remain patient while we work to resolve this." But this wasn't temporary. And what happened next would expose something far bigger than a software glitch. Airport IT technicians scrambled to diagnose the problem. The system had crashed hard, forcing a full reboot. But before they could restart it, they needed to pull the error logs to understand what went wrong. A senior technician named David Park was brought in. He was one of the specialists who'd helped implement the facial recognition system 6 months earlier. He pulled up the crash logs on his laptop, expecting to see the usual technical errors: corrupted data, network failures, server timeouts. What he found instead made his blood run cold. The system hadn't crashed because of a technical failure. It had crashed because of a massive bias cascade. The facial recognition algorithm had been rejecting passengers at an alarming rate, all day, all week, all month. And it had hit a threshold where the system couldn't reconcile the volume of flagged individuals with the reality that they were all legitimate travelers. David started pulling up the detailed logs: names, times, rejection rates. The pattern was undeniable. In the past 30 days, the facial recognition system had flagged 847 passengers for additional screening. Of those 847, only 12 were legitimate security concerns. The other 835, false positives. And here's where it got explosive. 94% of those false positives were people of color. Black passengers were 7.3 times more likely to be flagged than white passengers. Asian passengers were 3.8 times more likely. Latino passengers were 4.2 times more likely. The system was racially biased, and it had been operating that way since day one. David immediately called his supervisor. Within 20 minutes, senior airport security officials were huddled in a back office reviewing the data. Some wanted to bury it. Others knew they couldn't. Not with Eleanor Baptiste still standing at gate 35, not with passengers filming, not with a system crash that would require a formal investigation. Meanwhile, Eleanor had been joined by another passenger, a software engineer named James Wilson, who'd been watching the entire situation unfold. He'd recognized the signs of algorithmic bias immediately and had been documenting everything. "Professor," James said, approaching her carefully, "I think I know what's happening. These facial recognition systems have documented racial bias. They're trained primarily on white faces, so they struggle with darker skin tones and diverse facial features." Eleanor nodded. She knew this. She'd taught this. She'd warned about this. "The problem is," James continued, "they're using it anyway, and when it fails, they blame the passenger, not the system." A gate supervisor finally approached Eleanor. "Ma'am, we're going to allow you to board manually. The system is down, so we'll verify your documents the traditional way." Eleanor looked at her steadily. "So when the technology fails, suddenly my passport and ID are good enough. Interesting." The supervisor had no response. Eleanor boarded her flight 47 minutes late, but she didn't stay quiet. By the time she landed in D.C., she had already contacted the ACLU, sent detailed documentation to civil rights organizations, and reached out to journalists she'd worked with for decades. The story broke that evening. By the next morning, it was national news. The airport had a lot of explaining to do. Here's what happened in the aftermath that you need to know. The airport was forced to release the full audit of their facial recognition system. The data confirmed what David Park had discovered: systematic racial bias affecting thousands of passengers over 6 months. The technology, sold as state-of-the-art security, was actually perpetuating discrimination at scale. 3 major outcomes followed. First, the airport suspended the facial recognition program pending a complete overhaul. Second, a federal investigation was launched into the vendor who sold the biased software. Third, airports across the country began reviewing their own facial recognition systems, and several found similar bias patterns. Professor Baptiste didn't sue for money. Instead, she demanded policy change. She worked with civil rights organizations to draft new standards for AI systems in public spaces. She testified before Congress again, this time with real-world evidence of the harm she'd warned about. But here's what she said in an interview that stuck with me. "I have the education, the resources, and the platform to fight back. How many other people experienced this and just accepted it? How many people missed flights, missed opportunities, or were too intimidated to speak up?" That's the real story. Professor Baptiste's experience revealed a system affecting millions, and without that system crash, the truth might never have surfaced. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe and turn on notifications. I cover these critical stories every week because technology isn't neutral, and we need to keep demanding accountability. Comment below, do you trust facial recognition systems? Should airports be using this technology?